I have a 6-year-old son, and the other day he was singing this song that I think was from My Little Ponies, and he kept singing, "We are the cutie crusaders" or something. It's all about these ponies who have to get these cutie marks on their backs to show their status.
We are the cutie mark crusaders on a quest to find out who we are, and we will never stop the journey, not until we have our cutie marks.
When I was in high school, my mascot was the crusader, right? And this big Christian soldier with a cross on a shield and a sword. There's been a campaign to kind of question whether that's appropriate.
When I see Crusaders as a mascot, I put that in the genre of seeing Native Americans as mascots and other things that we deem offensive, but I think it's beyond offensive. I think there's an issue of safety and fear and violence evoked in these mascots. From a Jewish perspective, all the Crusades evoke is just unmitigated violence against families and communities, tens of thousands of people being murdered for really no reason at all. The other example is during the World Cup, where you had a number of English fans that were dressed as knights and crusaders, making their way to a Middle East country and being upset that they weren't allowed to wear their crusader shields and outfits because it evoked the same violence for Muslims too. And the very fact that they couldn't understand that these images evoke some of the worst violence is part of the problem.
If you've got somebody sitting beside that person, you've an Arab person sitting beside that person, and all they see is a symbol of murder, rape, theft, it's not harmless fun. And the same way that I said someone wouldn't go to an American football match draped in a Confederate flag and sit beside an African American person and, hey, how are you doing?
Patriarch of Constantinople is the religious leader in Constantinople. He's kind of the head of the newly formed Eastern Orthodox Church in the 11th century. And then you have the Pope as the head of the Roman Catholic Church. And so the Patriarch of Constantinople says, hey, we've got these Turks that are coming and attacking Constantinople. Would you come and help us fight them back? And Pope Urban II receives this request and says, yes, we need to conquer Jerusalem, which has nothing to do with what was actually being asked. And so Urban II in 1095 at the Council of Clermont calls for this crusade, calls for this holy war to go and take back the Holy Land. Again, kind of a new concept at the time, that this idea that the land that Jesus lived in, the lands that he walked, that is holy because Jesus was there. And it belongs to Christians rightfully. And so even at this point, even though Muslims have been in control of the Holy Land for 300 years by this time, there's still this idea of, well, we Christians need to take that back. There's something primally wrong about unholy people owning our Holy Land.
According to Arab Muslim historians, there are accounts of Muslim men, women, and children being slaughtered by heavily armed soldiers who came to the city until there was not a single Muslim left within the city. And in these Arab historical accounts, there are also stories of synagogues being burnt to the ground with Jews in it. But from the Arab Muslim historical accounts, as far as we can tell, this is not a theological clash.
The Muslims who are there are like, who are these crazy Franks, right? Like they call them the Faranj. It's only in kind of the colonial period, as you have these European powers occupying huge swaths of the Muslim world, that Muslims start reading these European sources and be like, oh wait, that was a really big deal for these Europeans. It wasn't a big deal for us. And that's when the term Salabiya, crusader, is coined, is in the kind of colonial period.
A number of crusaders and their leaders thought the war really should be against Jews because Jews explicitly, in their mind, rejected Christ as their savior. So from a Jewish perspective, it simply was a war between Christians and Muslims, in which Christians also went out of their way to kill Jews too.
But then this idea of crusades goes on for hundreds of years. There's constantly both crusades to retake the Holy Land once it's been lost again, but then other crusades against other enemies or other heretics against the church. And so the idea of the crusades persists up until modernity, is that there are righteous wars that Christians go and fight at the behest of the church, at the behest of the Pope, in order to consolidate Christian control.
So a crusader mentality is rooted in history, but it's not necessarily about history, right? A crusader mentality is about a blueprint or a script that we're all sort of a part of. Who is violent and who does violence in a justifiable way? What is sacred violence?
I think a crusader mentality is one in which you believe that there is a civilization and that civilizations are hierarchical, meaning one is the right and everyone else is wrong. And a crusader is protecting the real and true civilization. So in so doing, you are allowed to engage in some form of violence because the protection of civilization is the same feeling and urgency as the protection of your family.
We asked participants in our course what images or ideas came to mind when they thought of the Crusades. Many people thought of violence. Many people thought of destruction, of religious war. Other people thought of chivalry and heroes and kind of stories about these great knights going off to fight in a war, right? So there's still a veneer, I think, to a lot of people's impression of the Crusades that says, well, there might be some bad stuff that went on there, but the underlying motives of people were good, or the character of the people fighting in them was still something that we should admire or aspire to. And it creates a binary in the world, right? I am on the side of the angels. The other side must be on the side of the demons.
In pop culture, like the kids' cartoons, I mean, I think that we could walk away from that and say, well, it's harmless, and it's interesting, but I think it's just sort of it's one nugget that becomes normalized, right? The Crusaders is good, and everything else is bad. It's sort of the seeds, the roots of when that starts, and then when we begin to see the Crusader paradigms in foreign policy, in the news, how we talk about the Muslim world or the Arab world, I mean, that's when you see it become used in ways that's harmful, that arguably is connected. So when George W. Bush, before going into Afghanistan, saying that this is a crusade against evil, sure, if you're listening to the cutie Crusaders, it's like, okay, it's a crusade. It's just so normalized.
We understand, and the American people are beginning to understand. Now, this crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while.
This was within the 2016 campaign cycle. I think it was the spring of 2016. Trump was giving an interview to CNN, and he said, I think Islam hates us. This was part of his justification, because he just proposed doing this ban on Muslim immigration, this Muslim ban.
Do you think Islam is at war with the West?
I think Islam hates us. There's something there there's a tremendous hatred there. There's a tremendous hatred. We have to get to the bottom of it. There is an unbelievable hatred of us.
In Islam itself?
You're going to have to figure that out, okay? You'll get another Pulitzer, right? But you're going to have to figure that out. But there is a tremendous hatred, and we have to be very vigilant. We have to be very careful, and we can't allow people coming into this country who have this hatred of the United States.
I guess the question is...
And of people that are not Muslim.
I guess the question is there a war between the West and radical Islam, or is there a war between the West and Islam
It's
itself?
radical, but it's very hard to define. It's very hard to separate because you don't know who's who.
I think in Trump's mind, he was trying to speak for the United States, right? I think Islam hates us Americans, but in that he's excising all the Muslim Americans, right? All the people who identify as Muslim and American, he's saying, well, they're not part of us.
We can't say all Americans are, fill in the blank. You're going to run into problems, and we tend to be more nuanced when it comes to ourselves. You can't say all Muslims are, fill in the blank. There's not going to be a single answer or adjective or anything.
The assumption that Islam is somehow violent and Christianity is somehow peaceful, or Islam is somehow uncivilized and Christianity is somehow civilized, is where we find the problem. When you start to assume people are uncivilized, you're starting to strip away a sense of humanity that allows the dignity that prevents you from acting violently towards them to fall away. They no longer become human in the same way that other people are human, and that allows for a sense of violence that is not just justified, but again, can be encouraged because they're not human like us.
My big research project now is on the January 6th insurrection, the Capitol riot. And you actually literally had Capitol rioters wearing the Crusader cross or carrying around flags with Crusader crosses on them. So very much invoking the imagery of the Crusades, the idea of the Crusades. Even some of the flags that some of the Capitol rioters carried had the slogan of the Crusades, Deus Vult, God wills it. This is what, in the story, Urban II preaching this sermon that instigates the Crusades, the crowd cries out, God wills it. God wills it.
So how to get past the Crusader mentality? I do not think it's an easy task.
I would suggest it's a generational approach more than something that we would ever see in our lifetime.
What we are starting to see in the modern world are multi-ethnic, multiracial democracies. Even what we're doing in the US and in other societies that are trying this experiment of pluralistic democracy, and to recognize that really that story hasn't been written yet.